Lead negotiators from 12 countries who are taking part in the Trans-Pacific Partnership began meeting today in Salt Lake City, Utah. Now, to refresh your memory, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, is a new trade deal being negotiated that would open up markets between nations along the Pacific Rim. Now, it's also a trade deal that has, by and large, remained a secret from the public. However, the massive pact is expected to affect jobs, environment, consumer safety, and a whole lot more. In fact, we're beginning to learn details about how much is really in jeopardy. Last week, transparency organization WikiLeaks released a draft of the intellectual property chapter of the TPP that reveals new proposals for copyright and patent rights that would boost big pharma companies. And it raises questions on how the trade agreement would affect individual rights and free expression. Of the leaked documents, WikiLeaks editor-in-chief Julian Assange said, quote, "If you read, write, publish, think, listen, dance, sing, or invent, if you farm or consume food, if you're ill now or might one day be ill, the TPP has you in its crosshairs." It's for that reason that a number of demonstrators gathered today in front of the hotel where these negotiations are taking place. And RT's Ramon Galindo is there in Salt Lake City. He joins me now. Ramon, you were at the protest today. What would you say these demonstrators were most concerned about?
Yeah, Ameera, dozens of people showed up in front of a luxurious hotel here in downtown Salt Lake City to speak out against TPP and demand transparency in the negotiations. Now, there were several labor representatives, labor activists there, really concerned about the possibility of jobs going overseas, U.S. jobs going overseas, and not enough labor protections being put into these negotiations. There are also very many environmental activists that are concerned that the TPP just doesn't pay enough attention to climate change as it promises to, and would eventually lift a lot of environmental restrictions that are currently placed on the energy industry. But perhaps one of the largest concerns is the issue of patents and how it can affect healthcare in the future. Several activists spoke out about it, including former Salt Lake City Mayor Rocky Anderson. Let's hear from him now.
These folks are trying to get together and expand the time during which they'll have monopolies on medicines that will have horrendous effects for people suffering from life-threatening diseases.
It is an agreement that will dramatically restrict trade and exchange in a way that will crush generic production of pharmaceuticals and raise medical costs to the point that the world's poor will not be able to access life-saving medicines, and people are likely to die.
Yeah, and a lot of people here in the crowd were also very excited over the news that they received from the WikiLeaks revelations, giving more information about how these intellectual property regulations might affect the negotiations and the agreement ultimately. I mean, it really reinforced the beliefs by some of these critics that the trade agreement will ultimately restrict access to information online and restrict access to affordable medicines.
Sure. And as I understand it, Ramon, members of Congress do not actually know that much about the TPP either. So they're just on the same level, I guess, as the public. What's your sense as to why these negotiations are being held from congressional leaders?
Sure. Well, Congress started creating a buzz about wanting to know what was going on here last year, starting with Senator Ron Wyden and some members of the Democratic Party. But we have to remember that TPP has been dubbed NAFTA on steroids, SOPA on steroids. SOPA came under a lot of fire, was ultimately not passed by the Congress, but a lot of critics fear that some of the provisions in SOPA will be snuck into regulations that are being drafted right now in the TPP, and that the people in the Congress won't be able to debate it. But when it comes to NAFTA, we have to remember that a lot of Democrats, including candidate Obama before he was elected, was very critical of NAFTA, and the fact that many economists say that it killed tons of jobs here in the U.S. and had other very negative side effects. He was a vocal critic, as were many Democrats. So if it does turn out that a lot of the same instruments that were used in NAFTA are being used here in TPP, that could be very politically damaging.
Is there anything these Congress people that are speaking up can do at this point to stop this from going through?
Sure. Well, Republicans have also voiced their concerns. They want some more currency provisions put into the agreement. But at the end of the day, the Obama administration wants to fast track this idea. That means that it will not have a chance to be debated on the floor of the Congress. Congress people will only be able to give it an up and down vote. So once it gets down to the congressional floor, it will be very difficult to stop if they indeed vote in favor of TPP.
And lastly, Ramon, what's next in negotiations? What can we expect going further?
Sure. Well, there's negotiators from around the world here in Salt Lake City. They'll be here through Sunday, still hashing out some of the legal details. I spoke to a representative at the United States, the United States Trade Representative, a spokesperson there, told me that there will be meetings coming up next month in Asia as well. And while the Obama administration says that they want to have a deal in place by the end of the year, the United States Trade Representative says that they don't want to stick to that deadline, that this agreement will come to fruition based on the meetings that we'll be having in the next few months here.
All right, Ramon, we will follow this story with you tomorrow. RT correspondent Ramon Galindo, thank you.
You bet.